I'm Adarsh, Principal Correspondent with Express Computer, and I welcome you all to another exciting and insightful webinar. Now, this is brought to you by Express Computer in association with ThoughtWorks. And the theme for today is Unlock India's Potential by Leveraging Digital Public Infrastructure. Now, digital public infrastructure, or the DPI, it forms a digital foundation, especially for the government and enterprises to build over and deliver digital services to people. And now, a great example of DPI is Unified Payment Interface, or the UPI. An infrastructure on which multiple fintechs like Razorpay have established their payment gateway, enabling enterprises to make touchless, cashless, and faceless payments while keeping transactions secured and safe. So to draw light on the subject, we will see esteemed speakers from ThoughtWorks and Razorpay join us to share their expert views on how digital public infrastructure can be leveraged optimally to unlock the country's maximum potential. And this webinar, we will witness a thought-provoking and insightful discussion with our esteemed speakers to get the best insights on the theme. So today with me, I have Mr. Vinod Sankaranarayanan, Head for Digital Public Goods and Infrastructure at ThoughtWorks, and Mr. Arif Khan, the CIO at Razorpay. However, before I hand over the session to our speakers and we get into the technology talks, I would like to take our audience through the households first. So this is an audio video webinar which is being broadcasted live and it will be available as an on-demand feature on our website. So we will have poll questions in middle of the webinar. So I would request our audience to actively participate in the poll questions, share your perceptions, share your views because they are of great importance to us. Now, once we are done with the speaker presentation and a panel discussion that's lined up for you in this webinar, I will open the floor for the Q&A session and our audience can use the Q&A block box that is flashing on your screens to send in our questions and our speakers here at the webinar will answer those questions live as per the time permits. Now, last but not the least, if in case you face any technical issues, I first recommend you to refresh your browser. However, if the issue persists, please use the same Q&A box to send in your query, and a team from the backend will definitely get back to you with some solution. So let's get into the webinar now. So our first speaker of the day, he is Mr. Vinod Sankaranarayanan. He's the business head for digital public goods and the author at ThoughtWorks. He has nearly 25 years of experience in digital transformation. He is a seasoned expert in leveraging technology to drive positive impact. Now, Vinod has been championing the building and adoption of DPGs and DPIs across organizations for the last 5 years. He has authored Software Ownership Transfer, a seminal work on agile software transitions, and has extensive experience working with governments and non-government organizations. So with this, I welcome you, Vinod, to this exclusive webinar with Express Computer.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Adarsh. And good afternoon to all of you. It's really great to be here, sharing some of our thoughts in terms of how businesses can leverage DPIs and then reach out to new demographics. So I just have a couple of few slides, and then the interesting part would be the discussions themselves. But our essential point is that for India and India business houses to write the next chapter in growth, the business houses should be leveraging the digital public infrastructure that has been laid out so beautifully across the length and breadth of the country. Just to start off the narration, these are just India in numbers. Obviously, the most exciting place in the entire world today, the fastest growing large economy today, and the numbers are there for all to see. I was also very thrilled to see the youth literacy rate at around 96.54%, which also shows that India has come a long way from where we were, let's say, even 20 years back. The other interesting thing that I noticed in these numbers is, India's digital transaction value is about 4.39 trillion, and India as a GDP is about 3.7 trillion or so. And only in the case of India, the digital transaction is higher than the GDP. In in every other large economy, the digital transaction value is just a small fraction of their GDP. So that shows that India's growth curve or India's way of growing is significantly different from the rest of the world has been going through. And so when businesses look at India, we also need to look at India from a very, very different eye, not get bogged down by the lens of how businesses have grown in other countries. Now, what is the opportunity? Many of you would already know that while India has been growing by leaps and bounds, digital commerce by itself has only reached about 10% of India. Most of the vast hinterlands of India has not really seen digital commerce penetrate. And part of the reasons are, the vast diversity that we have, the languages that are, 800 different dialects in India, and of course the economic strata, which means that disposable income for this set of population perhaps is not that high, that legacy business operating in typical business models would not find catering to this group um, profitable. But today, a significant portion of the population remains underserved. And our point is that if we leverage the homegrown digital public infrastructure, then organizations and corporate houses would find it sustainable and profitable to actually start serving this vast consumer group. Now, uh, just to add one more point, right? In many ways, DPI is already very pervasive. Of course, everyone knows about UPI and Aadhaar, but DPI is not just in banking and finance. For example, I have spoken to a lot of my friends in industries, and they are saying that they are already using Aadhaar, Vahan portals, e-way bills to figure out who should be their logistics partner by creating that level of trust by giving them to the right shippers. They're able to get their goods quickly with great level of trust and without a lot of damage. Namayatri has started really disrupting the way mobility has been happening. This is just one example. Banking and finance, I don't have to speak much, but the interesting point is there have been unicorns that have really come up front. Zerodha is a classic example, just because they really adopted. They were one of the first movers as far as adopting some of the DPIs are concerned. Um, Banks have started integrating with account aggregators. Today's rural credit stands at around 3 trillion rupees, and that's actually supposed to go 3 times more in the next 3 to 4 years. And a lot of that is going to hinge on how banks are able to use account aggregators, use transactions as a way of finding out credit worthiness of people, and then provide those loans. And those loans actually mean that businesses are going to find a different set of consuming class, probably in the rural areas or India 2, India 3, India 4 towns, um, to whom it will start making more sense to do business with. There is also healthcare and education, where a lot of DPI has actually come in place. Almost all of us would have taken the COVID vaccine, and COVID has been a very famous um, example that has been put out. I think without COVID and without the utilization of Aadhaar, it would have been very difficult for government to make sure that they're able to provide those COVID vaccines and also track and make sure that everyone who needs it are getting it. I will put up a poll question now. Perhaps the moderators can actually put up the poll. So the question is this: how many DPIs are you using in your organization today? We've got four options: one, two, three, or more than three. And I've just listed a few of the DPIs. It must be quite amazing for all of us to see that already there are so many DPIs. While the poster child has been Aadhaar and UPI, and there are so many more that already are being used. So perhaps you could give it a couple of minutes. Adarsh, maybe you could give the cue on when we can take a look at the poll responses.
Sure, Vinod. We give around 35 to 40 seconds to the audience to let them answer the poll. And then once the time is up, the team will show the response. So here the response from the first poll.
Oh, nice. So about at least 60% of the audience are already using more than 2 DPIs in their organization. So yeah, that speaks to the point that in many ways DPI is already very pervasive. And if you start looking at, we haven't probably realized it. It's a new normal. We are anyway using Aadhaar as regular Indian citizens. We are using UPI, I'm sure, on a daily basis. But GST and DigiLocker, many of these things have started getting used more and more. I, for example, use DigiLocker. If you think DigiYatra is a DPI, then obviously we use DigiYatra when we start when we are traveling. So yeah, so I think it's good to see this. All right. So now, let's see, if we have to reach out to this demography, we also should be cognizant of the challenges that does exist. There's no point in, thinking everything is hunky dory and just moving. So this demography has its own challenges to be, served. I think the first one is unique to India, the language diversity. We've got 22 official languages, more than 800 dialects, and add to it the fact that many of our fellow citizens cannot read and write. So the question is, how do we reach out to this audience, and how do we transact business with them? So that's definitely a unique challenge that is, put out, that is out there for India. And then the low per capita income. Definitely, this set of customer demography may not have as much disposable income as, let's say, some of the folks who are in the tier one cities, or who are the top 120 million Indians. And so that creates unique challenges in terms of being able to serve them in a very efficient way, in small sized, sachet sized, providing them sachet sized units of service. So that's going to be challenge number two. And then we should be uh, uh, cognizant of, or aware of, social disparities that does exist. There are cultural norms that are there in most of our rural hinterlands. It could be in terms of, who has access to digital technologies, who do not have, starting from senior citizens to, let's say, women. There could be only one or two phones in a house. So how do we make sure that we are able to actually cater to everybody in the household, etc. And then the fourth is the dynamic consumer landscape. Now, outside of finance, which is just, exchange of zeros and ones, almost every other service or good actually means that we have to deliver something to someone's house. And India is a large country. While we have diversity in, language and culture, we also have diversity in terms of how our landmass is. And it continues to be a challenge, an infrastructure challenge, to be able to reach out to any and every corner of the country and serve all of India's citizens. So, given this, what we have come up with, ThoughtWorks has come up with, is a playbook. And the body of the playbook is these 10 tenets: how corporates can leverage DPIs, but also follow these tenets, so that they will be able to more sharply reach out to this set of demographics in a sustainable and profitable way. Now, I don't think we'll have time to go through and well into each of these 10 tenets. But in a sense, if you look at the 10 tenets, while there will be overlaps, they broadly can be categorized into how some of the tenets provide customer satisfaction and, in turn, customer trust, how you can create efficiency, so that, while you have to provide, lower per unit value items, you can also create efficiency, so that, it's not eating a lot into your costs. And then, of course, growth. How do you actually grow and expand your business footprint by reaching out to these demographics? Now I'm sort of coming to the end of my presentation, and what I do want to finish up is to say that, many of you may recognize this or perhaps not, but India is already tech at core. And if you were to take the persona of, let's say, Rakesh, who stays in a tier 4 town in India, let's say like Banswara, you would actually realize that he's already using a lot of DPIs. Obviously, COVID helped for Rakesh in getting his vaccinations. He may be going to a government hospital today. He may be using his health records. The consent ARC manager may help him to get a referral from a different doctor. Rakesh's children may be studying in a government school, and Diksha is a great platform that provides for a digital medium through which his children are able to, revise their chapters, read textbooks on their phones, and so on and so forth. Upayog is a digital public infrastructure running in more than 200 urban centers in India, through which Rakesh can put in his urban complaints. Let's say there's a plumbing issue, there's some electricity issue, or even things like he needs to get marriage certificate, death certificate, etc. There is a platform called Upayog that helps him, Rakesh, or maybe one of his relatives perhaps are under the poverty line, or they need to get certain government benefits. The G2P platforms like AEPS, Aadhaar Enabled Payment Service, for example, would allow for Rakesh or his relatives to get government benefits On his work front, he's already using account aggregators, the Open framework for getting credit to run his shop. ONDC has already come in. He's probably using ONDC to at least deliver goods to some of his neighbors, or to maybe the village next to his town. Payment is anyway, it's been spoken out enough. Mobility and logistics, ONDC FASTag is something that Rakesh is perhaps using, or the wholesaler who's delivering to Rakesh is also using for the same. Below are, this is just for reference purposes, are some of the foundational uh, DPGs that end up getting into many of these solutions, right? So one could be Aadhaar or MOSIP, the DigiLocker, where Rakesh could hold his health record or could be holding his education certificate. Consent manager is important so that Rakesh can share his, let's say, income tax details with the bank, or where through consent manager he can actually share his health records to a second doctor to get a second referral. DIVOC is how certificates are provided, be it a COVID certificate, be it an education certificate, or be it a tax paid certificate. And a Bluetooth low energy protocol is probably required. Let's say Banswara, let's assume Banswara has intermittent internet connectivity. Then Rakesh can actually use the Bluetooth low energy protocol on his phone to be able to share information to let's say his business correspondent or even to a government entity. And finally, if Rakesh actually cannot read and write, then language is going to be a very critical factor for Rakesh to be able to interact or transact with all of these things that we said. The point is, all of these things are already out there, and Rakesh is already consuming this in one way or the other. So it's very, very important, or it's ripe for exploitation for India businesses to actually reach out to this demography and start serving Rakesh and his ilk to grow their business. Now, why do you think it's different this time? People could say that, hey, so many waves have come and gone, and why should this be any different? Will we just go back to our old ways of living? I think not. For one, UPI and Aadhaar have already become a way of life. I think we cannot think of a life now where there is no UPI or Aadhaar. But also, more importantly, foundationally, if you see that we've got a highly educated and digital first population. Like we said, 96% of India's youth are educated now. Half of smartphones in India are in the rural hinterlands. Um, Internet accessibility is very high. India has the lowest rate of data charges. So I've heard this joke, right? I mean, data is cheaper than atta in India. That's actually true. And that's really propelled a lot of people to start consuming internet and also transact digitally. And there is willingness to adopt. And amongst MSMEs, SMEs, the Paytm Soundbox is a classic example. Many retailers across the country are using the Soundbox as a way of making sure that cash is getting paid, and they're not having to keep track of who's paying, who's not paying, while they're actually supporting other customers. So I think there is greater willingness for our SMEs and MSMEs to adopt, and of course our consuming class as well. And add to it that over the last 10, 12 years, starting from the setting up of NPCI to UIDI to ONDC to the National Health Authority, and setting up these policies, which are fairly forward-looking. The DPDP Act that supports how you can provide this consent architecture for sharing information, to initiatives like the Digital India PM Jandan Yojana that allows for bank accounts for everybody. I think the both the policy as well as infrastructure has been laid out beautifully, and you can see some of the fruits of that. We've got world leading DPIs. Some of them are getting international as well. And so we think that we are sitting on the cusp of a huge transformation that's going to happen. 10% of India is digital in many ways. The other 90% is waiting to be tapped. And we think this is just the right time for India business houses to start addressing this populace. So with that, I will open the last poll, um, and then we will give it back to Adarsh. So this poll is: how have DPIs helped your business?
For this poll also, we give audience around 30 to 40 seconds of time. And your options are improve efficiency, will decrease cost, save time, better customer service. increased revenue, new clients and demographics, more service to existing clients, or both the first and second options. So you can, please actively participate in the poll questions. These are going to help us understand your perspectives as well. So I'll request the team to show the results when the time is up. Yeah, here we go.
I think I'm very glad that 67% of our respondents are saying that DPIs have helped them improve efficiency and increase revenue. I think then this is a very well informed audience, and I think they will definitely see the value of leveraging DPIs even further and move to catering to new demographics. Thank you very much, Adarsh, for this opportunity. And if you have any questions, if you want to reach out to know more about the playbook, I would request Adarsh or someone, if you can share the link for the playbook. People can also download and read it. If you have any further questions, you can always reach out to me at my email address.
Thank you, Vinod. That has been a wonderful presentation, very insightful. And I think with that presentation, now we move to the most interesting part of this webinar, the panel discussion. So to kickstart the panel discussion, I would first like our next speaker to join us. He's a veteran in the BFSI industry and has held leadership positions at renowned names, including the National Payment Corporations of India, MasterCard, HDFC Bank, and more. So he has been instrumental in driving digital transformation initiatives, leveraging data and analytics, and developing innovative solutions. His expertise in payments, banking, and technology will provide valuable insights into the evolving digital landscape and the role of DPI in shaping the future of businesses. So with this note, I would like to welcome Mr. Arif Khan, the CIO at Razorpay, to join us for this exclusive webinar and this very interesting, very exciting panel discussion. Arif, can we please have you on screen?
Thanks for having me here. I was hoping, Vinod, you speak a bit about Digi Yatra. Just the other day, right? As usual, I live in Bombay. You know the traffic over here, right? Most of you guys would have visited Bombay. With the Digi Yatra app, check-in is like a breeze now, right? I mean, getting into the airport security is a breeze. And I hear that now they're going to extend it even for the immigration counters, right? So imagine the kind of time, effort, energy that goes, all that would have not been possible without having this kind of infrastructure that is there in place, right? I guess Vinod has actually really gone deep and covered quite a bit about as to what is the DPI, what are the different DPIs in the country. I just wanted to take a step back and, kind of make it more relatable in terms of how do we see DPI, right? I think one of the easiest way for me to relate to what we have now as DPI in the country, which has done wonders, is imagine this, right? If you remember, if you go back 200, 300 years back, right? The cities, the kingdoms which build roads really did well, right? Because it allowed a lot of commerce to happen, markets to happen, labor to move and so on. And those cities prospered well, right? So like what was so great about Istanbul or Constantinople in those days or Rome, they had great infrastructure. Their infrastructure was hard infrastructure, right? And now in this world of digital, DPI is the soft infrastructure, which is on the same principle, right? It could be used by private, it could be used by public, and you could build upon it, right? I think when we talk about DPI, it's also very important to understand that DPI in itself is not the end solution, right? It's not the superset. It's a subset. It's just that one thing, and which allows others to build around it, right? And my understanding, and most of the folks on this conversation will be businesses, right? And they are not in the business of doing DPI themselves. I think they're in the business of, hey, how do we get onto the DPI bandwagon and exploit it to build more solutions to cater to our consumer needs, our business needs, and so on and so forth, right? Think of it, right? We would not be having this call. We would not be on this Zoom. We would not be using mobiles. We would not be on social media if we didn't have internet, right? And the power behind internet is there was a standard called HTTP, HTTPS, SMTP that existed. It's a basic standard. Again, a digital railroad, and everyone latched onto it and kind of writing story. So in a nutshell, right, for something to be qualified as a DPI, it needs to be interoperable, right? It needs to be reusable. And I think that's where it presents its opportunity and a lot of challenges in existing businesses, right? Because as businesses, we have been running business in a certain way. And sometimes we tend to mix up what is digitalization with DPI, right? Again, digitalization is the larger superset. DPI is a subset of it, right? We spoke about Aadhaar, Vinod spoke about it, right? You look at it, right? What has Aadhaar enabled us to do as a country? And what are the use cases it is built to so many private entities like banks, lending companies, distributors, and so on and so forth, right? I think the World Bank had predicted for India to reach a bank account penetration would take roughly around 40 years, right? And this was kind of a statement they had made somewhere around early 2012, 2013, if I'm not mistaken. But India accelerated to 80% coverage of bank accounts in exactly 6 years. So what would have taken 40 years got compressed to 6 years. And the good part is when this acceleration happened, right? 55% of the new bank accounts that got, these are the low value bank accounts, easy bank accounts. 55% of these bank accounts were opened by women, right? So there's inclusion happening both sides. So you're getting more people in the banking, and women who traditionally have been left out of the financial world and the economics that runs around it, they will be included, right? Once that was there, imagine what happens there, right? It certainly allows a lot of private entities to reach out to these customers to be able to lend to them, because now suddenly they have a bank account. It's suddenly more simpler and easier to validate who they are, right? So if what it do, it bring down the cost. And we all know when the costs come down, if tomorrow I could check, if Vinod mentioned like sachet services, if it was not feasible for institutes to go behind a customer who has less than 30,000 because of the cost, today the same customer, even if he has 5,000, it's reasonably easy to go behind it because the cost has come down, right? So I think when we look at DPI, we need to look at it with a very open mind and then think through with partners like ThoughtWorks as to how could we bake it into our core design and then build over it, right?
So I think
So
Arif, you very well brought that out, and especially the analogy of how the earlier civilizations used to build the hard infrastructure, and then that turned out to be an economic boom for their civilization. That DPI is sort of a similar thing. It's happening in the digital side of it. I think really interesting analogy to that. Also, you gave how it is beneficial, especially when you give the example of how the bank account, the number of bank account has boomed, in just 6 years. You said it compressed to the it was used to be in 40 years, that got compressed 6 years. So it's an amazing fact for our audience too. But as we just saw the polls, if I just take an example of the audience that have joined us today in this webinar, I see that around 60-65% roughly were the people who answered that they are using more DPIs, and they are in more than 2-3 DPIs, and they are using it for increasing their revenues and improving their efficiencies. So there is still a good number of enterprises which are yet not there on DPIs. So what are some of those, what are the challenges that they are facing? I would like to know on what is their hesitation? What are the issues that these companies face? And if you guys, can share out of your experience, what are those challenges and how, these companies can overcome those challenges? So if I may, if I
Yeah,
may
sure.
start with Vinod maybe this time.
Thank you. Thanks, Adarsh. So DPI stands for Digital Public Infrastructure. So the first challenge for many industries is that it is digital. Okay. And if you have to start leveraging a DPI, you have to become digital yourself. Now, industries have been set up over the last 40 years, 50 years. IT may not have kept pace with how the rest of the world has been going forward. Simple example is, many of the legacy systems used a concept called, they built IT systems as monoliths. The system is the way it is, and it's all of the system or none of the system. Today we have this concept of APIs, right, where you are able to create specific services as APIs, and each of those APIs can then work in consonance with other APIs. So then you have the ability to mix and match what service you want to give in what form, and so on and so forth. So legacy organizations first have to break the monolith, create them into, you could call them microservice or something else, break it into that model so that they can innovate, they can be more nimble and flexible in terms of one, accessing the DPIs, and also adding onto the DPI and providing those services. So I definitely think that's a challenge. I think finance has been fairly good. I think finance typically have been forward in terms of how infrastructure or technology has been utilized. A lot of the other organizations, for example, I could take healthcare for example. Out of 100 rupees, they would, for good reason, they would probably spend only 1 or 2 rupees in IT system. They would rather purchase medicines or focus on other medical aspects or other medical equipments and so on and so forth. So there are vast industries who first have to become digital and then digitalize. Uh, so I give this example of, if your system is like a large ocean liner, it can be at a port and it can serve a city. But if you have to go into villages through, your backwaters, etc., you need to have speedboats. So a large ocean liner needs to be broken up into a 500 speedboats so that, you can send 1 or 2 boats to serve, every village. So I think that culturally is a factor that one needs to think of, and then take that forward. So that I think is a big challenge. The world is going very fast in digital technology. We have to keep pace with it.
So as far as I can make out, you basically talked about that there are enterprises which are still, using the legacy systems, and for them, there's a huge gap for them to first move on to DPIs. They need to digitize themselves, upgrade their IT infrastructure. Now, I would like to rope in Arif in this conversation. Arif, what would you like to add to this? What Vinod just said.
So, look, all of us on this call, we are, organizations for profit, right? Profit drives a lot of the initiatives, the decisions that we take, and it's fair. We are not NGOs at the end of the day. I think we need to look at the challenge on two planes, right? So there is question one, whenever you want to do something new, hey, what's my ROI, right? Incidentally, what happens in DPI, because it's like infrastructure, right? It's like building a highway, right? And we being very solution project-minded people, it's very difficult at this point in time to imagine what it would open in the future, right? But these are some long bets that one needs to take. It's like, look, again, I'll give an example of my home city, right? There was a Bombay-Pune highway that came. Some of us were very excited because we could speed over there. But what's happened along the way is just not connected Bombay-Pune, right? Look at the opportunity that's thrown up, right? Along the highway, there are pathways that goes to food court. So there's a business that has come up over there. Along the food court, now there is shopping. People found it that, hey, when I'm on a holiday, I'm traveling, I have some time, I can actually shop over there, right? There is a fuel pump that has come up over there, right? There are smaller towns coming along the way. A lot of this happens over a period of time. And I think if you go by these references, the question comes that, hey, what is the right time to invest in some of this, right? And I think a railway investment, apparently on the face of it, looks to be something which is like billions and billions of dollars, right? For example, right, the world climate issue that the globe is trying to solve, I believe is going to cost us some trillions of dollars, right? But you'll be surprised to know something as Aadhaar, right? I think we have what 1.3, 1.4, roughly around billion Aadhaars, right? And 300 million digital authentication happening through that. The cost of building Aadhaar was roughly around $1.5 billion. The money that has already saved us is roughly around 28, 29 billion, right? Look at digital distribution, right? The DBT that has happened, right? It's already saved us around somewhere around 30, $35 billion in the way the money has been sent out. So one is the ROI question. And I think that's where you need to work both internally and with partners who can try to think through, because we end up trying to think through solutions, right? And I think, and that's one of the fundamental challenges that I believe that organizations have. And the second challenge, which goes hand in hand, is technology, right? Look, you're running, some of them have adopted digitalization to a certain extent, to a certain degree. It's like trying to change a tire when you're running at, at a speed of 100 kilometers per hour. Right? It's going to be some really hard choices, right? How do? You can't stop your existing business. You need to adopt something like this, build it into your layer, able to orchestrate. And now, because you don't know what's the end, you really don't know what's the scale you're going to see, right? And when do you, in the hardware, in the infra world, we used to always say, hey, let's add CPU when we need, because it costs you money, right? And I think that's where, one is on the ROI and deeply linked with the technology. And that's where you start saying, hey, whether internally within my tech team or work with a partner, maybe someone like ThoughtWorks. How do I get my design right? How do I get my architecture right? How do I think of scaling? How do I make sure that I get return on the dollar? How can I put the least number of CPUs? I'm just using an example, and optimize that I have capacity when I need, and I'm not got unused capacity, right? And a lot of the entities that are there on the call, they already have some kind of mobile application or an internet-facing thing, an internet-facing website, right? I don't want to stop it. I want to move from legacy to the future. How do I do that? Right? I think those are the two things that we really need to solve with. And the publication that ThoughtWorks has, right, speaks a bit about it. It dwells a little bit on the tenets, and I think that's where I think the answer lies. Maybe Vinod, you want to come in? Vinod and me instantly worked on a project long back, right, where we had an application doing X amount of business. When we wanted to move ahead, wanted to get more flexibility, adopt to the new world, right, we found it a challenge that, hey, we can't stop it, but we yet want to modernize. What's the approach over there? Maybe we know this is the right time for you to come in and give a bit.
Sure. So the approach that Arif is talking about is called the strangler approach. Put it simply, you don't stop everything and then sort of like do a surgery inside out, right? You start making changes on the outside and slowly come in. So leave the core, let's say, features, or leave your core business as is. And when you are trying to create new business units, you start designing it in the new format. And as you get more and more comfortable and you start trusting the new way of doing business, you slowly start transforming your core businesses also uh, to start adopting the new style. So there is a technology side of it where you do strangler approach, where you start coding or you start developing technologies on the periphery for the new ones, and then slowly start impacting or transforming your this thing. So it gives trust. It makes sure that there is change is gradual. There is not a lot of disruption. So that's the strangler approach in terms of how you can approach it, and that is actually a good way for especially large organizations to transform, because transform you must. When take the case of UPI, for example, it's actually a little ironical, right? UPI was really prime for adoption as for banks. Ultimately, every UPI transaction hits a bank account. But now 90% of all UPI transactions happen on, GPay and PhonePay and other places. And I'm sure there are other entities as well who are doing that. So that's one case. Or other digital natives. For example, there is Namayatri. There is, of course, Amazon, Flipkart, and ONDC will create other startups as well. And I'm sure most of the startups are starting by adopting DPI from the scratch, right? So you can't just sit and wait and see what's happening. You have to find that right balance. All business houses need to start transforming, but there is a way to transform with your eyes open, so that you're not taking away your cash cow itself. So start from the periphery, start making changes on the outside, come in. Even on the business side, for example, you create a small new business division that caters to the rural population, create that as an innovation arm, or whichever form it is, and then slowly make sure that seeps in back to the larger organization. And we have done that with several India business houses. So that's something that ThoughtWorks can definitely help.
No, and Vinod, if I may add, right, I think what we need to understand, the demand will change, right? Yes. Our customers, they are changing, they are adopting, right? And they are going to demand a lot from you, right? I'll again, right, simpler example. I work with a bank, right? One of the largest private sector bank, wonderful organization. Majority of the customers used to come for their bank statements at some point of time to the bank branch, right? They used to come between a particular hour, weekends not available. Now, over a period of time, the same customer said, hey, look, I'm not walking to the branch, or the next generation, I'm going to go on the internet. I'm going to do your website. The third one said, hey, I'm going to go to the mobile banking application, right? Now, some of this we had not imagined. Then came a generation which is now saying, look, I don't even want to talk and interact with the bank. This is my wealth application. I want all my statements to be aggregated over here. So I'm not going to come and pull it. You push it by default. Now, what it means is you would continue doing a traditional business, but the way your traditional business interacts with the customers has changed. So you have no choice but to adopt. And yes, while doing that, you minimize your disruption, right? Whether it's on the technology side or on the investment side, and the approach that you choose over there. That's extremely relevant. Again, if you take UPI, we clearly know there were some few banks that were early adopters. And today those banks continue to grow at a tremendous pace. But there were a handful of banks who probably did not opt for it. They have now come into the bandwagon, but it's going to always be a struggle. So I think whenever you talk about public infrastructure, 90% of the time, 9 out of 10 times, you should choose to join that bandwagon, work, get it up and going, figure out what is the minimum thing you want to do, and then build on it as you go ahead.
So I think both of the panelists very well, brought out the significance of DPIs. And again, just taking the last sentence that you just said, Arif, that 9 of the 10 times, if you should get onto that bandwagon, and that's going to reap the benefit out of your entire ROI. You will get that whatever you've invested. Now, while I was listening to both of your, both of your deliberations, when you talked about ROI part of it, Arif, firstly, I want to understand, can hesitation among the small, specifically startups or small companies, while they're adopting their, starting out on the DPI journey or modernizing their existing infrastructure, could it be because of the cost constraints? Can cost become one of the major challenges?
No, I think, how do I put this, right? I think cost is always a consideration for any organization, right? I think it's the question of making the right choices and priorities. You always try to figure out what's the best return on the dollar that I'm going to get, right? So I think it's about making choices, both on the technology side and on the business side and on the product side, right? You will always, in a country like India, thankfully, we always have so many things to do. And I think it's a hard problem, but it's not a problem that we can't solve, right? Certainly, I mean, if you look at it, the benefits of digitalization is clear, right? In terms of efficiency, how do you handle the numbers? How do you service, right? Look, very few organizations calculate the cost of servicing. You look at it, a self-serve, do-it-yourself kind of service. Visa is a service which has been done manually. And now you add to, imagine this, right? You have some entities who have millions of customers. If they had to service them in person, how difficult it would be, how costly it would be. Now, all that is whatever we've done in digitalization also is changing now with AI coming in, right? There are robots, there is generative AI, and there's a bunch of other things happening. So I think you can't afford to be lagging behind because the world is you can't bet against technology, right? You have to bet for technology. That's the way the world is going. You can't be a laggard, right? Yes, it may come as an expense today, but it's detrimental to your existence. So when it comes to whether you can survive in the long run, vis-a-vis whether you have to burn some dollars now, you'll always take the choice of surviving. So I think that way it's pretty sorted out in my view.
Right. So you very rightly pointed out, that today no company, no enterprise, irrespective of it's big or small, can miss out on the technological growth if you want to match the global pace of growth. So my next question is majorly, I would like to take the part that you just said, and I would like to move to Vinod on that, that since AI has also come up these days, and let's say there's an enterprise that have utilized a DPI platform, built over certain applications. So especially with the onset of AI, the threat landscape has also, evolved. It has also grown. It has also further complicated and gotten sophisticated. So, do you think the present status of DPIs that we have does it provide a secured infrastructure for the companies, that they can trust completely? And also, I'll come with the same question to Arif also, based on your experience of Razorpay. So if I can start with Vinod, let's talk about security now.
Sure. The only question I will ask back, Adarsh, is when cloud started, organizations had the same worry. Okay, there were some adopters to the cloud. Most of the folks, banks included, said, hey, that's not what we want to do. We do not want to share our data with an external party, an external vendor, etc. Obviously, guardrails would get put out. And the world is sitting and watching. And right now, there are a lot of philosophical points on, whether AI will take over the world and, is hallucination going to be such a big problem, etc. I believe guardrails will come in to address this. But the answer to that is not to say that, hey, I'm not going to adopt AI. In fact, I believe AI and deep tech is going to be the huge digital leap. It's because of AI voice. For example, Bhashni is an example where ThoughtWorks had actually worked on this. It provides speech to text, text to speech, all open source. And you add that with LLMs, you start getting something like a Jugalbandi, a chatbot, where people who can't read and write can still converse and then get the kind of information that they need. So it is actually a bridge that allows for people who today are not digitally conversant, who don't know English, etc. They are also now part of this new world. So I see AI as a huge enabler to reach out to this set of demography. The other part of whether it's going to take over the world, what are the security risks, etc. I think policies, being responsible, putting the right guardrails in place, all of those things would start moving. That motion would start going forward, and they will all get put into place. I would definitely urge organizations to adopt AI. There are companies like, for example, Zerodha already say that they are using AI for their coding. I've had some customers, I will not name them, when we said, hey, we will use Copilot for coding, it'll make you go faster, etc. They had questions on, hey, what about the IP? Is that our IP? If AI generates a code IP and so on and so forth. Good questions. They also need to start balancing the risk reward and then,
So,
figure out.
I'm sorry, I'm cutting you, between, I'm interrupting, but the question was more on the DPI, the infrastructure that on which I'm building an application. Do I get that infrastructure, secured? Is that infrastructure secured enough, and is that reliable enough that I can take it up, adopt it, and build my applications, transfer my data, keep my data on it?
So
The question was more on that side.
let me try and take a shot at it. See, I think when
Yes,
we
please.
start using DPI, I think first, just going back, I think if anything, the Indian policymakers have been really very calibrated, right? And I think it's proven in the last decade and a half. They've taken really calibrated steps. Most of the DPI infrastructure, I don't know all of them. So that's the reason I'm using the word most. They are secure by design, right? Because the data that actually travels the minimum. For example, if you look at Aadhaar, right? Aadhaar is the only identity program through the world which carries only, I think, 4 or 5 fields. It doesn't just have too much information. A lot of security concern comes in, data theft concerns come in when there's a lot of data, right? So by definition, there is less data. There is trust in the way it has been built out, the APIs. There is a consent architecture on top of it. So I think it's fair to say that I think probably India has one of the most thought through DPI infrastructure in the country, right? Then the issue, so that should not be a worry for any organization trying to work on DPI, right? Then when you start working on DPI, the DPI governance and framework is so strong that you have visibility to only what you need to know based on a certain consent, right? And there are fair amount of guidelines, etc., already in place that, hey, your environment is secure. Of course, that doesn't mean that you don't have to do something. You have to do, but there is a lot of best practices available, certification entities available. You just don't latch onto a DPI by default, right? There's a very thorough governance and gating process, which validates, it asks you to do certain things every 6 months. There is a self-submission. So I think the landscape structurally has been designed to be very secure. It does bring certain onuses on you, but that's not like crazy, right? You can manage it very well. So that shouldn't be a problem. Uh, let's take, like, for example, like Aadhaar, right? Even in the Aadhaar transmission, the entity in the front end which is accepting doesn't actually have access to your Aadhaar. Okay. So, hey, where there is no data, so there is no worry that you need to have about it. Do you need to then ensure that your infrastructure is there protected? The answer is yes, which is also there in today's world. So I hope I was able to clarify.
Yes,
And
Vinod, you can add, please. Yes.
no, I just want to 67% of our respondents say they are already using 3 or more DPIs. So I think in a sense there is the answer there.
Yeah, definitely. I was, want to get that clarified so that, the people who are not yet there on the DPIs can, get an answer that, okay, it's secured also. Now, moving to the next part of this, the next question that I have for both the gentlemen is basically how, the enterprises can actually leverage the power of India stack and create innovative products and services, especially tailored to the, their customer, the side, that's kind of customer that they have. So if you can comment on that. We can
So,
start with anyone. It's okay. Mm.
so I'll go. I have given these examples. Of course, I haven't built this, ourselves, but just to show the power of possibility. And I thought I'll take the example of movies, entertainment. So recently I was giving this talk somewhere, and then it was an audience, young audience, and I asked them, "Hey, which is the next movie that you're really looking forward to?" And at that time they said Pushpa 2. Apparently, it's a big hit. Now, I think 70 to 75% of India will not be able to watch Pushpa 2 on first day, first show. Okay, it's going to only land on certain theaters, etc. I'm sure that 70-75% would want to watch that. And they are, in the end, probably going to watch a pirated, version or something like that, right? Now, imagine, and there are about what, 600,000 villages in India, right? Now, imagine if the film producers are able to give 1 day access to every village head person for a day for, let's say, 5,000 rupees. Okay. And assume there are 1,000 people in that village, it's 5 rupees per person, right? So, and let's say half of India's villages adopt that, that's 150 crore additional revenue for, that movie. Okay. And all of that is possible using technology, because you've got your 4G, 5G networks, you've got your KYC, you've got DigiLocker, you've got, authentication, you've got UPI to pay for it, etc. So and in DigiLocker and consent, you can actually make sure that the movie is there only for so much time, and then you can pull it back. So the technology completely exists. So this will actually give an assured 150 crore additional revenue for this, for the film producer. It's probably a new, uh, new expansion of business for an Airtel or a Jio or some such provider. It's entertainment for a lot of people who otherwise cannot watch first day, first show. So this is a classic example of combinatorial innovation on something which is about entertainment. Right. So I think the power of possibility, what you can do with this is just immense. And I'm sure if every business house starts thinking about what they can do, create an innovation team, get some new, fresh, young blood, start thinking, I think the future seems very bright.
That was an interesting example, Vinod. Thank you for sharing that bit. Uh, so looking at the time, I have a positive time. We're almost up, when it comes to the time for the panel discussion. But before I close, I would request both the gentlemen to give a closing remark. We can begin with Arif this time.
I think we should begin with Vinod this time, right? So Vinod,
Okay,
you take
so
a.
let Vinod start the closing remark this time.
Sure. No, thanks, Adarsh. My closing would have been this movie itself. It sort of leaves us on a lighter note, and the power of possibility and what's possible with technology. And then obviously, talking about movie and entertainment. But I think the same is possible across the spectrum. So if you take something a bit more sober and serious, with the advent of 5G technologies, with the possibility of remote surgeries, etc., there are already organizations who are not doing remote surgery, but then we've got, let's say, an ophthalmologist sitting in a city, and there is just a technician who's using their phone, and the ophthalmologist is actually checking somebody's eye, and then giving them, they saying, hey, you got cataract, you got something else, and here is a medicine that I'm giving, etc. So I think the power of technology that way, can actually start reaching the length and breadth of uh, India. It provides the opportunity for businesses to start reaching out to a huge populace. This healthcare is another great example. You could just have mobile vans that goes to different towns or cities. You could have specialists sitting in one part, and then serve customers far across. I'm sure it's going to be fairly sustainable and profitable as well for companies to start looking at such opportunities. So with that, I rest my case.
Thank you, Vinod. Arif.
I think, every business wants to expand, right? Get to larger markets, get to the market which were not penetrable earlier, not reachable earlier, not accessible earlier for various reasons. I think what's DPI and the larger technology has done is actually made that a possibility, right? For example, a lot of Indian professionals, right? We have a lot of artisans and craftsmen, etc. They always saw opportunity, they always saw value in being able to export, right? And if you look at the government policies now, with a lot of stuff that is done, so we are one of the payment gateways, right? That are increasingly working with, professionals, etc., where they want to be able to export their services, right? And for that, they need some kind of marketplace so they can offer something like a Shopify or something like that. And the important thing is, hey, somebody likes them, they're ready to pay the price. Then how does one collect money? That's where someone like Razorpay comes in and say, hey, there are some guidelines recently called PACB, which RBI launched, which allows us to do that. That's one. Then comes in that, hey, look, I'm sitting in tier 3 Moradabad or tier 2 Moradabad. I make some nice stuff out of bronze. How do I get it across? I've accepted the payment. Who's the logistics partner? Look at it, right? Now you have ONDC in a certain way taking care of that. So I think the possibilities are many. It's left to our imaginations. Increasingly, as I mentioned earlier, right? If you don't bet on technology, history has proven that you'll be outdone, right? Right. I mean, the only reasons we got colonized is not that we didn't have great kings, it's just that we did not invest in technology. And there's someone who invested in technology, made some ships, made some cannons, long range, you know what happened. So at the end of the day, if you're a business, your survival depends on adopting your customer needs and keep building and bringing more value. And the combination of those two in today's world, without adopting technology, without exploiting the DPIs that we have in the country, is going to be really, really very difficult.
So Arif, before I close this, firstly, I would like to, say that thank you for those historical examples and analysis. I think I am going to fall in love with those. They're very interesting. I've never, imagined looking at these stories or these things in this perspective that, okay, they never, that we never evolved on our technologies. We remained with the handheld, the swords and stuff, and they came up with the guns and cannons. Yeah, but it's an interesting take on that. I know it's very simplistic, but looking at that perspective makes a difference. It was a very wonderful discussion with both of you gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us for this panel discussion. But I would request you to please stay for a few minutes because we have a Q&A session with our audience. And looking at the time, I don't think I will be able to take much questions. But let's begin with the first question that I can see on my screen. This is, do you believe ONDC can scale like e-commerce and be the platform for rural services? So any one of you who wants to take that up can please share your perspective on that.
Sure. So I do believe in ONDC, right? And the power of the backend protocol that actually underline this, right? I think the ability to unbundle what it gets onto the table, it will certainly expand the reach that is there in the country, right? So the tier 3, tier 4, right? What happens with a typical DPI is, and I think we need to learn to be a little more patient. It takes a few years. So ONDC is relatively new. It's in the second year, if I may say so, right? I was part of UPI initially, right? I think the first couple of years, we hardly saw something. Then came that cycle, right? So I think if people tend to compare on that, I think it's early days. Fintechs and startup and other institutes have just started adopting it. For example, Namo Yatri now, if I'm not mistaken, is in 3 or 4 states, right? It's giving a tough time to the Ubers and the Olas of the world, right? And it's at a very, very competitive price. So I think it will eventually get there. But we also need to understand that any technology, any trend is first adopted in the city. It's top down in that sense, right? I think once the penetration in the city happens, it will start going to the tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. It is a little away, but it is certainly going to happen over a period of time, in my view.
Vinod, would you like to add anything to that?
Sure. So, do you know that energy exchange runs on the back of the ONDC or the backend protocol? So what I also think will happen is some of the newer forms of businesses, energy exchange is probably one, would readily adopt, because there's no legacy of, how these things would happen, would readily adopt protocols like ONDC. And definitely that is just one sort of harbinger of what the future would start looking like. Education, honest is also runs on the backend protocol, which also powers ONDC. So it's not just traditional commerce. Everyone thinks ONDC means commerce, you purchase grocery or purchase something, but this is just a medium for all types of transactions and exchanges. So in most of those cases, most of the non-commerce or grocery cases, there is nothing else. So they are definitely going to come on top of ONDC, and probably in some cases commerce will follow a little later. Examples are, even payment apps and things like that, who are now getting onto grocery. They would use ONDC as a model. What I heard was Ola, for example, for their grocery, etc., they use ONDC as a platform, while for their ride mobility, they use their own platform. So
You
I
see,
think,
I think there's a lot of computational powers also that will come in, right? So look at it, tier 3, tier 4, they may not necessarily be on a smartphone, right? They may be on a very basic handset, but now UPI is also available with 123 pay on a basic handset. Plus Bhashni, Vinod spoke about, right? Bhashni doesn't necessarily need a UI or a browser-based phone, right? You could make a call, you could talk in your local language, your local dialect. I think it covers what, 24, 25 different languages in the country.
yeah.
Very nice accuracy, tonality, etc. covered on that. So imagine that there is a poor farmer or someone sitting in deep India. He'll be able to get access to the market. He can speak a local language. There is trust behind it. He can do a financial transaction. So it's all happening. These computational powers will start working out, right? There'll be a lot of orchestration. Yes, some of this will take some time, right? It's going to happen gradually. But I think once it starts catching more momentum and steam, then you'll see a very rapid adoption.
Absolutely.
Right. So before we close the session, there's one more question. I think we have touched a bit upon this question, but I'll still read it out and let's see if you guys would like to add something to it. This is why in India more cyber crimes are happening and it's increasing every day. Is it because of the quality of DPI?
So one simple answer that I'll give is most of the crimes are social engineering crimes, at least to the best of my knowledge. It's not so much about technology, but it's about awareness and knowing who to trust, how to trust socially, and who should you share your pin with, and so on and so forth. So I think as a society, as a culture, we also need to start understanding that there are obviously these elements that we need to guard ourselves against and not be too trusting of whom we are interacting with.
Yeah, I think it's got nothing to do with DPI. It's largely people are more gullible, right? And I mean, a lot of the social engineering is you get yourself into a corner where, and there is no easy money, there are no free lunches, right? So if someone is calling you up and saying, hey, you're going to get 10,000, you won a lottery to blah, 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 obviously that's not happening, right? And I think largely a lot of this is because lack of awareness, right? And let's also understand that the people who are doing all these crimes are also pretty smart, right? So we need to really think through before we accept anything, click one or two here and there buttons, give out a pin to somebody. But again, it's not linked to DPI. It's just that people have been compromising the credentials, right? It's like earlier days, right? You sign a check, a blank check, and give it to somebody or left it in an open place. Someone is going to take it. So while we've adopted mobile phones, etc., we also need to understand that it's pretty private. You need to secure it, get a pin going, don't hand it to somebody, don't allow somebody else to use the handset, and so on and so forth, right? Protect it like the way you protect it from your wife to access it, just protect it that way from everybody else, probably.
Yeah, I echo that. That specifically DPI doesn't have anything to do with security as such. It's providing a platform to build in your applications. So even if you're not using a DPI, you have to build in some security in your applications. You have to adopt solutions for that. So I think that's total different topic, but it was asked by one of our audience members. So
Sure.
yes, it was a job to address. Thank you, both of you gentlemen. You've been really wonderful. I think there were multiple takeaways from this conversation that we have today, and I'm pretty sure for our audiences too, there will be multiple key takeaways. It was a very insightful session. A lot of knowledge, new knowledge at least for me. It was a lot of new knowledge to understand more about DPIs and how they are significant for enterprises to build on their applications and get at par with the global pace of growth. So thank you for sharing, sparing your time out and sharing us all the knowledge. And last but not the least, thank you to our audience who've been very patiently listening and attending this webinar. If in case there's any question that is still remained, you can please send that question to the email ID which was flashing on the Q&A slide, and the team from ThoughtWorks will get back to you with the right answer. Thank you very much, all of you. Would like to see you in our next webinars.